Hey everyone, welcome back. I've been waiting for the second round of Yareli buffs before touching on this topic again because that's usually at least how many our new frames have been getting before settling down. There are interesting implications, so I'm glad to finally share you my thoughts today on Yareli's changes compared to her original. If you recall on release, she was almost universally panned by everyone. Numerically, her stats were too low in basically all aspects, a disappointment in customization for Merulina, her personal K-drive, and most of all, a pseudo CC on her 4 that often did more harm than good. The rest of her abilities were varying degrees of effectiveness, but once again, not noteworthy. Keep in mind when we look at these changes today, I'm going to be also mentioning the original values and how far we've come and where applicable, how much further we could still go. If you want to compare what she will be like after these changes versus my initial take on the release, you can find my original build video breakdown on her at the top right. Let's jump right into the patch notes. It's pretty simple. She has received across the board buffs to all of her abilities this time around, so let's take a closer look. First up, Merulina. Perhaps the most interesting is a much needed mobility change to Merulina. Collision problems aside, she does operate as advertised, being the original K-drive. However, a few things are different. On release, she was literally identical to a normal K-drive except you couldn't mod it. Merulina also gave 75% damage reduction to Yareli and essentially acted like a shield with its own health pool while riding her. We also were able to use secondaries while boarded, however Merulina's release was quite bugged. Not just cosmetic things like the distinct Merulina hum constantly in the arsenal, but stagger resistance wasn't working properly. You wouldn't get knocked, but would get dismounted from Merulina when hit with knockdown effects. Auras on Yareli also weren't working while boarded originally. Luckily both of these were patched quite quickly. One of the bigger changes was finally allowing transference while on Merulina, but this does force you to dismount. As of the proposed update, we're basically getting the capability for Merulina to bullet jump. You can do this barrel roll both from the ground like a normal bullet jump as well as in the air. This is in addition to Merulina's existing super jump. This is a massive quality of life update because bullet jumping in Warframe has always been used as a form of momentum cancel and fine-tuning movement while in tile sets. This is one step towards making Merulina more accessible to use, and I'm wondering if we could also add in the aim glide Warframes normally have. It would essentially do the same thing to Yareli and slow her down for hang time in the air when you aim while on Merulina. This would really close the gap in mobility freedom while still keeping her distinct from frame gameplay itself. Of course, geometry will still always be a problem, but I don't think that will ever fully go away since game's inner tiles weren't designed for K-drives. As a smaller change, DE has also fine-tuned Merulina's input sensitivity, allowing you to do shorter jumps for smaller gaps and reducing the time needed for a full charge jump. This should make her feel even snappier in our tighter tile sets, and I'm hoping this will finally be enough to feel a difference, but I'm not too sure. What I'm still looking for on Yareli though is more synergy, and you'll hear me repeating this throughout the video. It will become apparent that while the abilities I go over work better now, they're still lacking a sort of cohesiveness in her kit. This extends to Merulina as well. I do feel that Merulina should be able to go up to 90% damage reduction through mods, with the same 75% base at 100% strength reference that many frames have, like GARUDA's Seeking Talon's bleed. This means you would need 120% strength to hit that 90% DR on Merulina, and I feel it is a good balance to make 90% DR an option without it being completely free. You still get 75% regardless at base, and parts of her kit would want strength also. With the movement restrictions and geometry problems of Merulina, I would still like to see an upgraded version of some abilities while on her. There are already so many examples of ideas for this to justify using Merulina more, both on the forums, Reddit, and comments to many creator videos on YouTube. I'd be extremely surprised if DE haven't seen any of these. Namely, I would want to see Aqua blades to have significantly increased range while boarded on Merulina. Merulina doesn't incentivize stationary play, and I think the fast, slippy, slidey gameplay could benefit from more range on the ability since it doesn't scale radius with stats currently. It's highly unlikely enemies will get as close to you on her than without Merulina, due to the speed of moving around for K-drive playstyles. It would also be nice if casting Riptide on Merulina would instead drag it behind you, letting you suck enemies up as you ride along while you hold your 4 and then drop them off after you let go of your 4, with an active drain while holding of course, or if that's a problem to code, just a duration-based suck behind the tail of Merulina. As we know once again, her 4 doesn't care about duration at all currently. Her 1 I think works really well as is and doesn't really need that many changes while boarded on Merulina herself. Now for her passive, this has not changed in the coming update, but it was doubled from 100 to 200% after release. I think this was actually a really good change and falls under one of the better passives in the game. It's funny because to some people, me included, we sometimes just use Yareli as a frame passive stat stick for our weapons. At 100% previously, combined with her lackluster kit, it just really wasn't enough to cut it, but at 200% it allows some really interesting synergies, such as the Zymos video I made with her a few weeks ago. You can check that out at the top right if you want to try it out. Trust me, it's actually pretty good. And now, Sea Snares. On release, they were actually one of the better abilities on her kit. What needs to be clear is this was never intended to be a killing ability. It just happens to be an ability that does damage and scales slowly higher with duration as well as just a bonus perk. It was always best used as a CC tool because she doesn't really have a way of immobilizing enemies for longer periods of time in her kit besides this. At launch, Sea Snares was restricted to just 3 bubbles per cast and was capped to 15 at once. Casting more than 15 would cause earlier ones to pop. This was extremely tedious to use, requiring 5 casts to reach max CC potential. It was quickly changed to allow 5 Sea Snares at once per cast, but the cap of 15 remained. The damage type was also changed from impact to cold. Now don't get me wrong, damage over time ramping from being trapped also increased from 80 to 125 per second, which is nice. But the second round of buffs have only increased their seek speed by 60% while slightly increasing bubble visibility so you know they're actually there. These second round of changes are nice, as it was mildly annoying to have to wait for the snares to catch up to your enemies previously, and it's pretty cool, as visibility improvements are always welcome. I want to bring your attention back to the first round of buffs. Bubbles were changed from impact to cold damage. With how slow and low the damage from the sea snares are, side note, yes you can kill things with high duration and strength and viral priming, but this just really isn't practical. It doesn't really make much sense why the damage type was changed, because you've probably noticed that while Yareli's abilities do a plethora of damage types, none of them are capable of inflicting status effects, except Aqua Blade Slash. I really do think if the snares are going to be doing cold damage, they should also be able to stack cold procs up to the cap of 10 times as time passes by while snared based on duration. Not only does this mean shorter duration builds will still retain lasting CC after the snares expire, but it also adds another element for CO or gun CO builds, and also the option to make combined elements for, say, viral bubbles if you're using Theorem Demolyststs, but that would be entirely dependent on if the bubbles are considered weapons, like the Flechette Orbs or Oberon Smite and a couple of other abilities, which I'm not really sure of, but that's some food for thought. Actually, DE should just make it so Theorem Infection and Demolition can infuse elements on all abilities, regardless of if it is treated as weapons or not. This would open up a whole new slew of possibilities for build setups. This ability also once again lacks synergy with her other abilities. It should also be made so that casting Riptide on any trapped enemies should not yeet them afterwards when its Riptide ends and keeps them in place. This gives her a decent grouping synergy without fully copying abilities like Ensnare or Airburst while retaining the damaging capabilities of Riptide. Aqua Blade should also have its own synergy with Sea Snares. Maybe you can, say, pop the bubbles to deal all the inflicted status damage at once, like a mini Expedite Suffering, except it's single target, limited to Aqua Blade's rings itself, and you have no stacking multiplier to the total damage inflicted that Expedite has. Or maybe similar to Vauban's Bastille, enemies trapped in Sea Snares lose % armor over time, which is extremely important for enabling Riptide nuke setups. Currently they require way too much strength and range, and armor is a problem. So normally you would have to slap Fire Blast or Pillage Subsume on, but it's still clunky and incredibly expensive to use. Sea Snares would give her a more budget option without having to sacrifice the Subsume slot. There's a lot more that Sea Snares could do to make her kit more whole. As of right now, it's a decent CC and pretty good as a 1, but the rest of her kit are at best only as good as her 1, and don't really synergize with each other. I only really see people using Sea Snares as a CC against Liches and Sisters currently. Now for her 3 Aqua Blades, the famed Helmet. These are actually buffed significantly since the original iteration. Most notably, the damage has actually tripled. Aqua Blades used to have 250 slash damage with force procs on release. This was very quickly doubled to 500 slash damage after the first few days, and these second round of buffs are stated to increase the damage by a further 50%. This means it's increasing from 500 to 750, as this is actually triple of the original stats and now finally falls in line with what I originally asked for in my initial build breakdown. While it is bottom of the barrel, a 3 times damage increase was the absolute minimum I determined would be enough to make Aqua Blades actually effective as a damage ability, as an ability in the 3rd slot should do more than just being a melee enemy deterrence. I would honestly prefer this to be increased to 1000 slash because the range is restricted, but I do deem it's usable already once the changes come into play for 750. Another change is that the range was increased by about 25%, so that means from 4 meters to 5. This is a 1.25 squared area increase, or an extra 56% hit area. This is actually a pretty noticeable increase, but honestly I think allowing range to affect Aqua Blades is fine. You can just use the radius scaling formula Hydroid's Puddle uses. It uses the square root of modded ability range, so a max range of 280 would use the square root of 2.8 or 1.67 as a range multiplier. This means the max range of Aqua Blades would now be 6.69 meters radius, which I think is pretty fair and still a lot more than the 5 meters we're going to be getting soon. 5 meter radius would be equivalent to 156 range with this new formula if we use the square root equation. For the damage side, I was originally looking for a 3 to 4 times base damage multiplier and using the base 4 meter range to scale with mods. Technically the changes have met the requirements, but just barely, so I can't say I'm completely satisfied. However, they definitely could have been more generous with stat buffs on Aqua Blades. To incentivize the usage of Merulina, as I said before, I think the Aqua Blades should increase to double the radius Yareli normally has. So a 280 range build would give 13.4 meter radius Aqua Blades while you're on Merulina. If possible, I think this should scale up the radius over time when boarding over a few seconds, and also scale down the radius when you dismount over a few seconds. But if that isn't possible, a flat instant radius increase or decrease is also acceptable. Mechanically, I would say the skill is sound. It's just a damage skill after all. They have also increased the duration of Aqua Blades by 50%, which actually leads me into my next point. This ability, Riptide, still has problems. Leading from Aqua Blade's base duration increase though, I think Riptide's suck needs to scale off duration or hold based. The ability as is right now is just a meh nuke. It has severe problems with armor and you can't move while the ability is mid-cast, and while they did reduce it, it still yeets enemies afterwards. So what has changed since launched? Riptide's damage was changed from Blast to Cold. This is actually a pretty big buff because Cold actually does bonus damage against armor and also partially ignores armor. However, this is only really against alloy armor, but at the very least it isn't resisted by ferrite armor. Originally Riptide was Blast, which is resisted by ferrite and had no damage bonus against alloy. The initial power of Riptide seemed okay, but somewhat lacking, as the first fix that they finally added doubled the scaling damage per enemy caught in Riptide from 25% to 50% on the final explosion. Because you normally build Riptide for range, since duration is a dump stat on it, the majority of the damage was from enemy count scaling from the burst at the end of the detonation and not the initial hit of the ability. So this scaling change is in most cases a nearly 2 times damage increase, and they also reduce the ragdoll after the burst. Moving into the final changes we are now getting, are you ready? It's just 25% more range. So I guess this means in DE's eyes, Riptide is mostly good already. However, that's not it. I agree that Riptide is actually in a pretty good spot right now, and mechanically the main issue I had was its lack of suck potential, which the radius increase addresses. While a 25% radius increase is small, remember area is radius squared, so this is a 56% area increase of suck. The base radius has gone from 12 meters to 15, meaning the maximum pull has gone from 33.6 to 42 meters. This is actually pretty substantial due to the size of tile sets and what is actually useful as a radius. And this means you no longer have to go super duper high range to make her Riptide effective and sucking enemies in. Of course, if you want to have literal tile eclipsing suck, you can do that also now. I'm still looking for synergy with the rest of her kit, however the range increase does help her kit a decent bit. You no longer have to go all out range to make her 4 functional, and this means you don't have to dump duration, which is a dump stat on her 4. This means you now have decent duration for her 1 and 3, and you can now have an effective loadout on her with a semi-portable half decent nuke on her 4 without gutting everything else. That said, I really don't like how we can't move while Riptide is casted. There's no real reason for this, as enemies can't hit us anyways. Just let us move around or shoot into the bubble. This is another reason why I want Riptide to be duration based, as it's already so short to start with. With the aforementioned suggestion of dragging a Riptide behind Merulina to suck up enemies, or a duration based suck when off Merulina, I think the ability could be improved a lot. Alternatively, maybe you could find a way to use a directional Riptide to push enemies all in one direction, but I really haven't given too much thought on that yet, so don't pin me for that. Finally, like sea snares, Riptide does cold damage but doesn't inflict the status. If it can become duration based, maybe you can have it inflict more stacks of cold the longer they're trapped in Riptide. This means they can set you up easily for a finish once they come out if they haven't died yet. She also gets some extra armor after release, but this was really only bringing her in line with the other nimble frames from 65 to 100, so this was mostly irrelevant. So to sum things up, Sea Snares will have really good seeking after the update, but still lacks any other utility. It inflicts cold damage but doesn't inflict status. I think it needs to either armor strip percentage slowly over time, inflict cold status, or both. It should also tie into her 4 or 3, whether using Aqua Blades to pop the bubbles for mini Expedite Suffering effects on single enemies without the multiplier bonus of Expedite Suffering, or Riptide to keep them bubbled and not eat them afterwards. I think it should also be made infusible with elements from Theorem Demolition so you can make viral or magnetic to deal with Grineer or the modern, beefier Corpus units, as status for damage multipliers against shields or health will always be useful. Merulina should feel better with more sensitivity for shorter bumps now and jumps, with faster super jump charging and essentially bullet jumping capability. I still think she could use with aim climbing to suit the interior tiles better and give a more seamless experience between boarded and dismounted. Again, I think she should be able to be modded as a K-Drive, especially for those K-Drive slam damage mods or trail mods. I think her 75% damage reduction should be able to scale up to 90% with Warframe mods, which is 120% strength. I think she should also be able to drag Riptides behind her and have a doubled Aqua Blade radius while mounted. Aqua Blades has usable damage now, with triple the original damage on release once the update drops. This is just enough to be usable in my opinion, and that's okay. Range has increased from 4 to 5 meters once the update drops. I would prefer it to scale with range using the square root function like Hydroid's Puddle, which lets it reach up to 6.69 meters radius at 280 range. 5 meters with this model would only require 156 range, which is pretty important for her 4 anyways. 50% base duration increase also helps a lot since building around her 4 normally dumps your duration somewhat. Riptide has 25% more radius now, so 56% more area coverage. This is a massive buff because it means you no longer have to go all in on range to make her 4 good. This also does mean you can actually mod other stats such as duration when combined with the Aqua Blades. 50% more duration post-update, which will be infinitely more viable in a build that wants to make use of Riptide at the same time. I think we shouldn't be animation locked during the cast. It should also be duration based since it's already so short, as this lets us make use of the suck longer. Also, as I said, let Merulina drag Riptides behind her when you cast it. It should also inflict stacks of cold based on how long they've spent in the Riptide, and finally, if it sucks up an enemy that was Sea Snared, it should leave them in place afterwards instead of yeeting them. I'm somewhat worried because new frames usually only get 2 passes before DE forgets about them and moves on, but she's in a usable state once the update drops. She could still be much better, especially in the synergy department, but at least her 4 no longer completely guts her kit if you build for it. Merulina still has problems, but we have gained passive mobility capabilities and fine-tuning. I'm really hoping if they come around for a 3rd pass, they address these synergy issues since the majority of the numbers game seems to be decently tuned now. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or, better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Tempest story and the Sisters of Parvos updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm also preparing to get you the info first once more new war info drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.